Rekkles is by far the best ADC in the West, and it's not even close. If there's one thing that sets him above all the rest, it's definitely his consistency, the most important aspect of being a great ADC. Even when he's getting incredibly unlucky games with bad teammates, he's always dealing great damage while having high CS numbers, which should be hard to pull off when you're behind. In this guide, we'll be covering a few tips we've noticed he does quite often to always be relevant in his games, even when his team is doing poorly. Let's get into it. During our first replay, Rekkles is not having a good time, mostly thanks to his Leona. She's constantly either misplaying fights or getting caught out randomly, handing kills over to the enemy MF. Things just get worse, as she dies again in the entrance to their jungle, which leaves Rekkles all alone, resulting in a death that was basically impossible to avoid. We've all had games like these, and they can definitely be incredibly frustrating. At this point, the enemy ADC is super fed off his Leona, which will make this laning phase nearly impossible to deal with. Let's watch how he handles this terrible situation. So, after coming back to lane, he's able to shove out the wave and head toward the river. The enemy team, getting a bit overzealous, go into a disadvantageous fight, so they're able to pick off the Tristana and hand over a kill to Kassadin. As he walks back toward bottom, he gets a small reminder about his auto-filled Leona and decides to switch things up to get out of this terrible laning phase. What he does is the simplest yet most effective thing he could do in this situation. He just accepts that his tower is going to die and proceeds to go mid as if the laning phase is over. There's no cross-mapping going on. Rift Herald is down and the mid tower is way too healthy to break. All he does is go mid to farm and let his own bot tower die. Normally this may seem pretty troll, but it's really smart for quite a few reasons. Number one, we're past 14 minutes. There's no turret plates left, so seeding a turret only hands over the 300 local gold and 50 gold to the other 4 members of the enemy team. Number two, first tower is already down in mid, so there's definitely no first turret gold that he needs to defend. And number three, the enemy Tristana, despite dying, is quite fed and in a good matchup. She'll have perma priority and 4-man dives are imminent now due to how fed Rel and MF are. Combine that with the fact that Leona is auto-filled and doesn't know how to play her role, and yeah, conceding his tower is literally the best course of action here. Sure, MF gets a bit of gold, but it can actually be beneficial for Rekkles that his turret is down. In the future, he no longer has to farm here under his tower defending it. He can instead wait for the wave to reach the safety of his tier 2 tower. It's much safer here since it's harder to coordinate dives this deep into friendly territory. This way, Rekkles doesn't have to be wary of 4-man ganks for the rest of the laning phase. The tip here is very simple to follow in your own games. If you won't be conceding too many turret plates and you're afraid you're going to get dove soon, then just concede your own tower. It's not worth the hassle of defending it and will be better for you in the long run to do so. Alright, on to our next tip. In this replay, Rekkles is doing very well so far in lane as Sivir. He has complete control of the wave and is constantly shoving in the Senna to get turret plates for himself. Unfortunately, his team isn't doing too hot themselves. We can see Twisted Fate using his ultimate and heading toward top lane, so Rekkles immediately responds with a very good rotation toward mid. He stops for a moment to clear the ward in the Dragon Pit, and then commits to his destination. Once he arrives in mid, he just instantly clears the wave, then heads back toward his own lane. In the process, he picked up 2 wards, a whole wave, and only missed a single melee minion when he came back. That's as good a rotation as you're going to get. It may suck to have a losing team, but this is definitely one of the major perks of having all your teammates die. We constantly preach how solo farming is the most effective way of carrying as an ADC. Well, if you think about it, your team dying just means that you can take everything in all lanes or the jungle for yourself. As long as you're not the one dying, you get the benefit of having all your team's available resources funneled into you, which can enable you to carry later on. You just need to be paying close attention to the map constantly so that you're aware of when your teammates are either dying or leaving a source of farm, like in this example. Regardless of how far behind his own team falls, Rekkles is almost always even or ahead of the enemy ADC in farm, since he abuses this tip to the max to make sure he's always farming. Our third tip is a simple but very useful one. Rekkles is farming mid and trying to set up a recall timing for himself. But almost the second Tristana jumps on his Jarvan at red buff, he instantly reacts and ults himself and Seraphine over there to try and get a counter kill. If we slow this down, as Ornn goes for a flash knockup just a couple of frames after Ornn misses, and Rekkles is already channeling his recall. This may not seem all that impressive, but it's a sign that he knew exactly what his move was before committing to this play. He already knew that he wanted to recall and instantly run back to mid lane. Having your next play in the back of your mind and immediately heading toward it when you know something isn't going to work out is useful all the time, but especially when you're behind. Thanks to his awareness, he literally didn't miss a single minion to the mid tower. The first thing to keep in mind here is that overchasing kills when you're behind is the worst thing you can do. If you're already behind, an enemy leading you into their other fed teammates is just going to spell disaster for you and your team. It's better to let them come into you than the other way around. Another thing is how often we see ADCs linger with their teammates once they group to do something. If a play is over, it's over, and you should be heading toward your next farming spot. Luxuries like overgrouping can be afforded by the winning team, not the losing one. You need to catch up as efficiently as you can, and you won't do that wasting time with your team. Our final tip is one that may seem obvious, but is definitely not utilized enough. All Rekkles does is recall almost every time he has an item component, even small ones. Can you think of any reason why recalling more often while you're behind may be better than recalling when ahead of your opponents? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first being that the proximity between you and your teammates is much closer than when you're winning. If you're losing, then you're all likely much closer to your base. All this means is that if you recall, you should be able to run back to where your teammates need your help or the place you need to farm almost instantly. Notice how Rekkles just left base, but because his team is losing so hard, he's already exactly where he needs to be after recalling for his little item. Of course, the opposite is true if you're winning. If your team is the one pushing onto your opponent's base, then recalling puts you incredibly far away from the action. This might give the enemy ample time to set up and engage and win a 4v5 fight, while you're making a gigantic trek back to where the action is happening. Not only that, but we do generally recommend that you sometimes don't even base with large sums of gold when you're ahead. If you're winning, you don't need your item completions as soon as possible, simply because you should still be stronger than them most of the time. On the flip side, if you're losing, you need every item completion you can get, even if it's just a longsword or a crit cloak. Every ounce of damage you can dish out in a fight when you're behind matters a lot. So, all the footage that we've shown you of Rekkles is from when he's lost his games. The main point that we want to make is that even if you follow these tips correctly, it may not matter in the end. That's totally okay. ADC is unfortunately the role most affected by team diff by far, and sometimes it will just be too much to overcome. It's okay to lose games, but you should always try to follow Rekkles' example. Despite how poorly his teams do, he's always relevant in his games. He doesn't fall behind in CS, and he's always dishing out good damage, trying to give his team the highest chance of winning that he possibly can. Like we always say, being consistent is the most important aspect of being an ADC player, and the thing you should be working on the most. And with that, we're going to wrap up this guide. Like always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.